Before we begin, I just want to give my normal disclaimer that this commentary is not a criticism of all theists. It is merely a criticism of the video I am covering. In this case, capturing Christianity's video, Why Atheism is Silly, where he attempts to use a statistical algorithm to prove atheism is unlikely. Okay, this is going to take a little bit of explaining. So, the bars on screen at the moment are going from left to right. What the video dubs perfect being theism, or the idea that there's an omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnificent God. Limited theism, or the idea that there is a God, but it doesn't have all three of the aforementioned qualities. And atheism. Perfect being theism and limited theism are given a probability of 25% each, while atheism is given a probability of 50%. As the video continues, he inserts different things about our universe and compares the probability happening in each of the three situations listed. And then by the end, the bars all look something like this. I say something like this because that last one is played with quite a bit. But we'll get to that as we go through the video. Now, the first problem with this argument is the probabilities listed don't actually have any real data to back them up. Take this part, for example.
But let's be generous again and assign the probability of order under atheism at 1 in 1,000 or 0.1%.
But how exactly do you know that would be the probability? Did you observe 1,000 universes that were created atheistically and find only one of them to have order? Now, before this point, he talks about how we'd expect nothing but chaos if there was no God.
All right, let's now turn to atheism. So under atheism, why would we expect every particle in the universe to behave in exactly the same way at all times and in all places? Why not just pure chaos?
I don't know. Why would we inherently expect something different? Genuinely, he doesn't even really give a reason as to why this would be the case. He just asserts it without any evidence or explanation. And he goes on about this for a little longer, too. But the entire time, I'm just forced to wonder where he got this information. Mind you, that's also giving you that the universe we live in now is ordered, something which scientists are not entirely convinced of. In fact, reading a couple articles on chaos theory shows that many scientists believe the universe to be, well, chaotic. And basically all of his data can be broken down in a similar manner. Later on, he says the odds of consciousness existing under atheism are 1 in a million.
Even being generous, the probability of consciousness arising under atheism is vanishingly small. But let's set it at 1 in a million. All right, let's be generous here.
But again, how do you know such a thing? What empirical observations have you made which led you to this conclusion? I also want to highlight his reason for consciousness being so unlikely, which is the following.
Consciousness introduces something radically new, subjective experience. Unlike physical properties like mass or charge, which are publicly accessible and measurable, consciousness gives its subject privileged access to mental states. So for example, only you know that you're in pain. Your awareness of it is fundamentally different from any external observation. This sudden emergence of a property so unlike everything else in a physical universe is deeply puzzling under atheism. Why would blind, unguided processes produce beings capable of self-awareness, rational thought, and moral understanding?
As an evolutionary advantage that makes us more adept to fit in our environment. Now, fair is fair, and his numbers regarding fine-tuning have a bit more weight to them given he actually cites a source.
Let's quantify this with an example. Dr. Luke Barnes, a cosmologist, has calculated that the odds of getting the right value for the cosmological constant are 1 in 10 to the 90th. 1 in 10 to the 90th. I don't know why I'm doing this. That's a decimal. Okay, if you don't know the math here, that's a decimal followed by 90 zeros before you hit a 1. To put that into perspective, that would be like basically randomly picking one specific atom out of the entire observable universe and somehow picking the right one. That's the probability that we're talking about here, by chance. Okay, and according to Barnes, when you combine all of the known fine-tuned constants, the odds drop to, here it is, 1 in 10 to the 136. At this point, these sorts of numbers are so small, it's almost impossible to imagine.
However, this just moves the question from how does this guy know it's true to how does Barnes know it's true? Now, Barnes, unlike this person, to my knowledge at least, is an actual cosmologist, so I am more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt here. However, I still have essentially the same questions, which would just be a case of this guy presenting bad arguments for the record. I'm not inherently faulting Barnes for that. For example, he throws out this statement just before giving the figure from Barnes.
And here's what's important here, though. The numbers that we see in these constants, they didn't have to fall into life-permitting ranges. And
again, how do you know that? How do you know other constants are even possible? How did you get that information in the first place? And by the way, I also noticed this little scientific error.
Gravity is strong enough to hold planets together, but it's not so strong that stars are going to collapse in on themselves, right? You've got the right number in that gravitational constant.
Well, yeah, at specific amounts of mass that stops happening. However, if the gravitational constants were different, planets and stars could likely still exist. They would just have different masses. XKCD even did a video not too long ago on the topic of the Earth growing by 1 centimeter every second. The end result is the Earth imploding in on itself after growing at that rate for only 1,500 years. Our gravitational constants aren't some magical thing that makes it so stars and planets form. It's just that stars and planets can only form in certain ways in our universe. If the gravitational constants were different, who's to say stars and planets couldn't still form? And the video is just full of shit like this. So you remember this screenshot I showed just a couple of minutes ago? The inclusion of one variable, that being evil as represented by one specific bar here, is him throwing the atheists a bone through including the problem of evil, which he views as the strongest objection against his belief system.
Then once we've got a sort of rough idea of how likely theism is based on the evidence, we're going to flip the script and look at atheism's best shot, the problem of evil. Spoiler alert, it's not going to do what atheists think it does. Even if we give it way more credit than it deserves, it's still not going to establish atheism as the most likely explanation of reality.
Now, I'll ignore the fact that I personally don't believe the problem of evil is the best argument for atheism, because that's just my subjective opinion, so I'm not going to bother arguing it here. Instead, I want to focus on a more fundamental problem. That being, obviously, if you stack multiple pieces of evidence for theism on top of one another, and then use that as reason to believe atheism is unlikely, atheism is not going to fare all that well minus some miraculous piece of evidence that destroys it entirely as a concept, which isn't what the problem of evil is. It's not what it's designed to do. It's a specific contradiction in one form of theism. And by the way, he starts playing with the numbers more at the end of the video, including giving highly unrealistic probabilities for perfect being theism producing a world with evil, and all it does is make limited theism more likely. It doesn't even really touch the atheism category. To which my response is, yeah, obviously, because the problem of evil is not a refutation of theism. Again, it exists as a paradox in one specific form of theism. Why not actually include any arguments for full-blown atheism? Because again, he called the problem of evil the best argument for atheism when that's just not what it is. By the way, he also has some responses to the problem of evil, so I'll just address those real quick.
If God exists, why would he allow evil? One answer that I find really plausible, is what philosophers call the soul-building theodicy. The idea here is that challenges, suffering, and even tragedy can serve a purpose. They shape us into better, stronger, and more virtuous beings. Think of it like going to the gym, right? There's no pain, no gain. Moreover, there are a lot of great goods that can't exist without evil: courage, self-sacrificial love, and the like. A good being might judge that those greater goods should exist to at least a degree, but then he'd need to permit evil.
But we're not talking about why it would exist in this universe as if the God in question was just randomly assigned this specific place to rule over. We're talking about why the person who created it would have made it in the first place. Wouldn't an infinitely knowledgeable being be able to come up with a way to get the same results without having evil in the universe? If we were really created in specific ways by somebody who could do whatever he wanted with the universe and create us however he saw fit, then any explanation you could possibly give is going to raise the obvious question of, well, why were we created that way in the first place? Now, at this point, you could very well respond by pointing out that for all we know, there actually is some limitation on a god's power which would cause them to be unable to do what I am describing. But that brings us back to limited theism, which again shows the main problem with what you have done. You haven't really included an atheist argument if the logical conclusion of the argument isn't atheism.
All right, let's start with our first piece of evidence: order. When I talk about order, what I mean is that all objects in the universe are subject to the same laws everywhere and at all times. So no matter where you are, if you're on Earth, the edge of the galaxy, or the farthest reaches of the universe. So for example, if you're in the Star Wars universe, part of the galaxy.
Okay, I understand that's probably supposed to be a joke, but you botched it very badly to the point where it kind of sounds like you think Star Wars is not only real, but happening in our galaxy. Also, Star Wars doesn't follow our laws of physics. The asteroid they land on in Empire, for example, should have far lower gravity than it's portrayed as having in the movie, just to give one example.
Everything behaves in exactly the same way, with the same powers and the same liabilities. So gravity pulls with the same force, light travels at the same speed no matter where you are in the universe, and electrons all have the same charge.
Well, what's the alternative? The universe changing its rules arbitrarily depending on where we are in it? Why would you expect that?
It's like every clock in the universe is perfectly synchronized, ticking away in harmony without any communication between them. This universal consistency throughout the universe is actually astonishing. It's not exactly something that we would just expect to find by chance.
Well, again, what would we expect by chance? In order for this to actually be an argument for theism, you need to come up with a genuine way the universe would not be consistent if a god had not created it. You keep repeating this same conclusion over and over again, and I keep stressing this because it is a constant problem, you aren't giving us a reason to believe you. Anyway, my final thoughts are that this video is quite silly. Good night and good luck.